yeah, this is, yeah, you get the treatment doing this at Hopkins.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what tips can I give you about this? I will, here's how this will work. I can test the mic for you. I'll test and see if, I've been noticing that the all mic actually isn't adding that much. So I'll check, and if it goes, if people start saying they can't hear you, then we can put this on, but maybe it'd be easy to do that first. So I'll introduce you, and I will say just a little bit about one assignment that they have coming up, and then I'll let you kind of go for it. I'll bring your PowerPoint up. Yes. Should I download it, do you think?
We could email it.
Okay, all right, so I'll just do that. Hi Fiona, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. Thanks for helping us test the sound too.
Oh yeah, no problem.
It's coming through loud and clear.
So when I share the screen, you mentioned
Oh.
Did you join two audios? Yeah, you got like the side screens audio.
Sorry about that, Fiona.
Okay, that's why I have a mute button on my computer.
The X, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I think that what happened was I didn't do anything when I asked me to do
Oh,
that.
it just oh, I didn't know that it does that. Yeah.
So,
You can start the video. Oh my gosh, Evan, if you can teach in these conditions, you're doing great. You know, actually, I'll moderate for you. How about that? I can watch the chat too. We'll trade places.
I know.
I will.
the worst is hello.
No,
English.
I know, that's what we have to do, like, we gotta do.
Evan.
Yes.
My funny story about Gerard, Manley, Hopkins is that I think I texted this to you, but in England I accidentally attended a mass service, and it was at the church. I didn't find out until afterwards that it was the church that he taught at, and I just haven't made a better mistake since that time.
That's awesome. Well, that's Bob Ross would say, happy mistakes.
Yes. Bob Ross.
That's who we need to bring. That's who I was missing in the.
As the great English poet Bob Ross.
Yes.
Happy
start.
Happy tree, happy bush, and happy mistake.
We do, and it fell off the wall. No, why I did that? No, good for you. It's all ripped and has holes poking out of it. Oh, by the way, guys,
I guess I'll put
Alyssa is now engaged.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
how does a COVID proposal work? Could he propose with his mask off?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay, you still got a nice location. Wow, what a story. Evan, do you want to just hit it in that wall? Yeah, in fact, I can. I should probably take
That was really good. That was really good. It was. No, it's okay. You guys are hilarious. Yeah, we are, aren't we? Yeah. We're just the best sleep.
It was crazy. It was nuts. It just.
I think we have plastic.
You don't, and that's it's impossible, and that's part of what's.
Stop. No, I'm sorry. Stop. I'm not sorry. I have an hour. You're right here. You do. Seriously. Amazing. So good. So
I don't relish that.
Yeah.
No. And you did like the guy.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome, Zoom people.
I did the
Can you, Zoom folks, can you hear me right now? How's the audio? Good, okay. If I talk to Evan and Evan asks me how I am,
How are you?
can you hear Evan? Okay.
Yes, I see thumbs up.
Okay, all right, yeah, just project too. You have to yell or if you want to record it, you can. Okay. Let's do
Yes, sir. 2013.
That I would walk backwards and to the side.
You notice
A year of my life.
If you notice that
Because I was
You regret that time?
No,
No, you don't.
because I was
I have a friend who went through like 6 years of age. She went from being a sports girl to a K-pop fan to like a gangster to a African missionary back to.
K-pop fanatics.
No, never went back to that.
I mean, are you
We're all very grateful for that. But
It's better now.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just a time period.
Yeah. I love that, honestly.
In some ways,
Growth
that's
development.
easier.
Yeah,
I still like it.
I didn't know that. I just told you what it was.
Well, I just said African missionary.
Okay,
Yeah.
Cool, so I'll just say a little bit about this assignment and then I'll introduce you.
Yeah, missionary too.
There, that's better.
Well, dear friends, we have a really special session today. We are going out with a bang. We get the privilege, I'll introduce Evan in a second, but we get the privilege of hearing from Evan Rhoades, our TA. He's going to talk to us about Gerard, Manley, Hopkins and maybe engage you guys a little bit and illuminate these really lovely poems for us. Before he gets going, I wanted to say one quick thing. You have just two kind of main assignments left in the class. We will have at least one or two more quizzes. But aside from that, you really just have two kind of main assignments left. One is the final, which will be take home for everybody now because we'll be remote as of after break. And the other assignment is this assignment here. It's called Against Iconoclasm. You probably can't see that if you're in class. Hold on, let me get these people and see if I can zoom in. The Against Iconoclasm assignment is I'm not gonna go through it right now. What I wanted to tell you was just to read it yourself. Read this part of the syllabus yourself over the break and start to think about it. Obviously, you'll notice that this assignment will change a little bit. You can't bake things for us. And so you'll probably be making something that's visual or maybe something that's auditory that we can experience via Zoom. But just a heads up, I want you to read this, not right now, but over the break, go to this section, the assignment section of the syllabus, and read over this little description and just start thinking about it. It's not due until the very end of the semester. We'll do these projects like our last days. So no big rush, but I just want you to start thinking about it, okay? That's the deal. All right, friends. Evan Rhoades is an English major. He's a senior, right? Yeah, he'll be graduating next spring. So he's been through many English classes. He took Brit Lit as a student, American Lit, and a variety of other literature classes. So he's very experienced close reader and very experienced writer. And a poet too, right? Are you a poet?
I'll
Yeah.
actually be sharing one of
And
my
are you a fiction writer?
Yes.
Or a fiction writer? Okay, so he's a creative writer as well. So I always say this to whenever I have a student leading a class. I'm a hardened soul. I look out at what might be a sea, not in this class, but what might be a sea of indifferent faces, and it doesn't faze me because I've been through the trenches of this thing for years. But I want to tell you, if you have one of your own up here, so be a giving audience, okay? As much as you can with the top half of your face, just express warmth and attention, okay? So let's welcome Evan as he talks to us about
All right, guys. So I'm really excited to do this today because Gerard Hopkins is one of my favorite poets. He might be the poet who most influenced my own poetry, and yeah, I just love him. So today we're going to be talking about Gerard Hopkins. He's a poet, he's a priest, and as we'll see later, he's nature's evangelist. So before we get into the poems you guys hopefully read for class today, we need to talk a little bit about who Gerard Hopkins is/was. So a little bit of a biography, what his life was like throughout to the end. Hopkins, early on in high school, was what we would call high school, was an extremely successful student, and he was born to a fairly well-off family, and this allowed him to fairly easily make his way into Oxford, which, of course, is a premier school in England. So he made his way there, and he started writing poetry. And when he was there, his poetry and his ideology and his thinking were largely influenced by some of the greatest literary figures of the time, Alexander Pope and Walter Pater. And actually, one second, I think, there we go. I don't want to block anything for the Zoom people, but so he was largely influenced by Alexander Pope and Walter Pater towards a kind of sensuous, aesthetic idea of the natural world and what poetry should do. Essentially, the senses were what we're focused on: touch, taste, smell, and the world around him was what he really dove into, both in his poetry and in his thinking throughout his time at Oxford. And so this was more of an aestheticist way of looking at the world, but he combined this with an extreme religious fervor that carried on throughout his life. And one of the major reasons for that is that when he was in Oxford, he converted to Roman Catholicism. And as we talked about, there are a lot of tensions, shall we say, between Catholics and Protestants. And that was still true to this point, perhaps not in the let's go to war type way, but more in a social standing way. And so not only did Gerard Hopkins convert to Roman Catholicism, he became a Jesuit priest, which is about as Catholic as you could possibly get. So given that his family was very Protestant, they essentially disowned him. He had very little contact with them for the rest of his life, and many of his friends, unfortunately, did the same, but he still pursued that religious vein. And it totally transformed his poetry. Unfortunately, we wouldn't really know because much of his poetry when he was younger, he burned. But we'll get to that. So once he became a Jesuit priest, he essentially gave up his poetry for his faith. He thought, okay, I have so much enjoyment, so much pleasure in writing this poetry that it takes away from my enjoyment and pleasure in God. And thankfully, thank God, that somebody convinced him that this didn't have to take away from that, because some of the higher ups in the church that he was a priest at essentially said, look, you can write your poetry, it's amazing, and it can contribute to the way people see Christ, it can contribute to the way you interact with God, and it can actually be a benefit to your soul. And so he was like, okay, that makes sense. And it did. So thanks to those, whoever they were, for talking to him and essentially getting us the poetry we have today from him. So basically he spent most of his adult life after Oxford teaching at various esteemed universities and fulfilling his duties as a Jesuit priest. He was eventually published, of course, but only posthumously, so only after death. His friend Robert Bridges, as you can see here, was the poet laureate for I think quite a few years, and he actually ended up publishing Gerard Manley Hopkins' poems about 30 years after his death. And so this contributes partially to why many historians kind of see him as a modernist writer, because he was published more in the modern age, even though his writing is more romantic in what it deals with, and also was originally written in more of the romantic age. So I promised we'd get to the poems, and we will, but first we need to understand a little bit more about Hopkins' ideology and why he believed what he believed and how it impacted his poems. So Gerard Manley Hopkins basically coined a few different terms for how to talk about poetry, how to talk about the natural world and the way they interacted. So the first one is inscape, and this is one of inscape and interest are one of you guys' vocab words, so if you want to get these definitions down, would highly recommend. Hopkins essentially believed that everything in the universe, whether it's a rock or a tree or a stream or you or me, sells. And what this means is essentially in its being, in its action, doing what it's meant to do, what it's created to do, it announces what it is, its deepest attributes, its deepest meaning. And so inscape is that meaning. It's the distinctive design that constitutes individual identity. And again, this can go for animate objects, pretty much anything has an inscape. And then instress is essentially the understanding of the inscape, the apprehension, the perception of the inscape. So Hopkins coined these terms to talk about kind of his ideology around poetry. And what he ultimately believed was that the inscape, this distinctive design, in-stressing the inscape or understanding this distinctive design would have to lead people to Christ, because Christ's stamp of creation is on all things. And so he thought, well, if you understand the deepest part of something, it has to lead you back to Christ, because the deepest part of all things are the Creator who created them. So because of this, Hopkins believed that poetry in the natural world, especially the way we interact with the natural world, should always lead us back to Christ. And this, of course, connects well with some of the things that we read in the Bible. In Romans, Paul talks about his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so that they are without excuse. And Hopkins would be like, amen. This is exactly the kind of thing that Hopkins is talking about and trying to kind of tease out and show to us in his poetry. Also, we have on Palm Sunday, as Jesus is riding into Jerusalem, somewhat triumphant on a donkey, as his disciples kind of praise and worship him. The rabbis say, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples. You're no God. They can't praise you like this. This is blasphemy." And he says, "I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out." And that is basically Hopkins' rallying cry, that the stones cry out. And so in Hopkins' poetry, that's basically what he's trying to do. He's trying to show us that the natural world cries out, that it shows us more about God, that we can take the natural world and learn and grow in our faith through what we've seen, through what God has given us in the natural world. So, now that you've heard a bit of a spiel about Hopkins' bio and some of his ideology, we can actually get to the poetry, which is what I'm most excited about. So, we're going to look at God's grandeur and his Kingfisher's Catch Fire in specific, because I don't have time to do otherwise, and they're my favorite poems, or half my favorite poems of all time. We'll see. But, so if you like, you can lean back, close your eyes. I'm just going to read God's grandeur first, and then I'll give you guys a couple minutes to read it yourself and look at a few of these things that are on the PowerPoint. Look for alliterations, the repetition of sounds, and why those sounds are being repeated. Some of the imagery he's using, some description. Why is he using specific images? What feeling does it create in you? What's being described? And why did Hopkins include those things? Maybe the form. He's writing sonnets in both of these. Why? And remembering that a sonnet has kind of a pivot in between those two stanzas. And then if you're stuck, if you can't really figure out any of that and you're like, then just try to give yourself a bare bones summary of like, what is the poem saying? What's actually happening? What do the words mean? So we'll start with God's grandeur. God's grandeur by Gerard, Manley, Hopkins. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. Why do men then now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod, have trod, have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge, and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights off the black west went, oh, morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. So I'll give you guys a few minutes to read that again for yourself if you like, and let me know what you think, what you found. Zoom people, here's the poem as well if you don't have your work to record. Take about 1 more minute here. All right, so I have up here a few things that we can talk about. First, I want to hear some of you guys' observations, what you thought, and what you kind of discovered in this poem. So, and Zoom people, feel free to just shout something out if I can't really see you raising your hand, so feel free to say something. And yeah, so what do we have? Yeah.
I thought that looking at the alliteration was really interesting because that's not something that I picked up on my first few readings of it, but there's tons of it throughout. There's just a lot of repeated consonant sounds, and yeah, it just makes the message come through that much stronger because the language just flows together, and within a line there's sometimes like 6 words that start with W or something like that.
Exactly.
Seems very intentional.
Exactly. So yeah, we have alliteration all throughout Hopkins' writings, but also especially throughout God's grandeur. And like you're saying, that kind of leads you along through the poem and can sort of kind of emphasize certain things. Here we see even the very first line, the grandeur of God, the name of the poem alliterates, that it will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil, right? So he's using this alliteration to emphasize these images that he's giving us and say like, look, pay attention, these are important. And it also makes it easier to remember. One of my things that I'm trying to do over Thanksgiving break is to memorize both of these poems. And I'm hoping that that would be easier because of that kind of repetition sound. And then we see wreck his rod. If you don't know, that basically means heed him, and trust him, do what he says, pay attention to him. And then, yeah, so it's all throughout here, especially at the end. The world warm with wings, broods, breast, right? So he's really wanting to emphasize the very ending there. Anything else that was noticed? Yeah.
It's got rhymes not only at the end of the lines, but also within the lines in several places.
Yeah, can you point one out?
The 7th line, nope, I cannot count. The 6th line, he had, and all his seared with trade, bleared and smeared with toil.
Yeah, exactly. And this is similar to alliteration in the way it emphasizes certain things, and just flows. Like you read these poems and they just sound beautiful. And he's trying to kind of engage your imagination, your enchanted mind. Yeah, exactly. Other observations. Zoom people, anything? Anything we have to say? Comments, questions, concerns? Not particularly.
I mean, I just love how it, like, he uses sounds to create imagery. Like, that's so cool. Like, shining from shook foil. It's like, it sounds like somebody has like a big, like, rug that they're like going and like shaking like soil out of like a big rug or something. It's just so cool.
So this is something that most great poets manage to do, and that is to make it so that the sounds that are being used, the words that are being used, sound like what's happening. And Gerard and Hopkins is a complete master of this. like you said, shining from shook oil. It sounds like something being shaken. The ooze of oil crushed, right? It sounds like exactly what's being described. So Gerard Manley Hopkins knows exactly how to emphasize the images that he's giving us. Yeah.
In line 5, he says, trod, 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 and as this part of the poem is talking about how generations have just kind of been walking over creation,
Mm-hmm.
and when you read trod 3 times, like all you can think is like people treading, and
Yes.
it almost sounds like,
Exactly.
trod just sounds kind of like a depressing march word.
Exactly.
So it's like he's contrasting the beauty of nature, and like at the bottom of the first stanza, it's bare now, nor can feet feel being shod. And it's like trod is like just an excellent word for this like depressing march. And
Yes.
he repeats it 3 times, which just kind of
Yes, exactly.
pounds it in.
Yeah, the form he uses, the way that he communicates here, the repetition, and even something perhaps nobody really picked up on, but or didn't want to share yet, but we see that as we have that trod, that's where we get into, okay, at first it's like, wow, God, this world is beautiful, God's grandeur is just all around us, and then it's like, wait a second, we don't pay attention, right? We trot on, we kind of take it all for granted, and then even we kind of destroy it. We sear the world with trade, it's smeared with our work, because we're all just busy, we're just going, we're walking along the world and not paying attention to the beauty around us. That the world now wears our smudge, that it shares our smell, rather than the kind of sense of God's creation. And then of course, the soil is bare and the foot can't feel being shod. In other words, like we have shoes on, you can't feel the soil under our feet.
Yeah, I really like how both the title and just kind of infused throughout the entire poem, it feels very biblical, the nature of, regardless of the situation, the world he's talking about, the people, the environment, he's still giving glory to God at the beginning and at the end. It almost reminds me a little bit of like some of Paul's letters, where in a weird way, where he introduces it always with a blessing and giving glory to God, and then closes it with the same. And even like at the end, he's describing nature and describing how people, God's creation, right, have turned away from it, but then goes back and says, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. Like he's acknowledging the beauty and the holiness and the awesomeness of God, both in the title and at the beginning, how the world is charged with the grandeur of God. Like it's like a current just running through everything that exists there.
Exactly. And have up here the Hopkins, he uses this sonnet format. He pivots from praise in those first 3 lines for God and His creation, and then there's this lamentation of what's been lost. And then he moves back to that praise and that apprehension that the Holy Ghost is over the world. He's encompassing it with warm breast and with bright wings. That the Holy Ghost is almost like Mother Nature. It's almost protecting us, keeping us safe. Is like a mother to the world and therefore to us. So maybe it's a little bit more obvious now, but we see in this poem this desire to capture and tame God's creation from humanity, as we talked about with kind of the Victorian age. Did you have something?
Oh, I was just going to go off of Daniel's point really quick.
Please.
I think that it's really interesting. He says, and for all this, but it says despite, like on the side, like despite all of this that we do, I like how he speaks to like God's character, not just like, what we see around us, but like even despite what we do, he never fails to show like the beauty. And like it says, like you were saying, like the bright wings, and it says, there's like, he talks something about like the black, like even through that, like I think like a sunrise, like even through all of this that we have done, or just the nature, the dark, he still like rises, and like we still see like those bright wings. He still makes himself known despite what we do to like diminish that.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have something to put onto that?
Yeah, just bouncing off like what Mariah was saying there. I think line 8 says, and for all this nature is never spent. And I thought that was so beautiful right after line 5, where it talks about like the earth just feels beaten down almost by, or we see it as the earth must feel so beaten down by this. That says nature is never spent. And that was so encouraging, like no, it's still there. It's way stronger than anything we can do to it. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah, and you'll notice that basically in all great poems, we'll have a pivot, and Dr. Oster said this in his poetry class, we'll have a pivot between lamentation where something bad's happened and praise, a kind of reconciliation of that, and because that really resonates with our souls. Let's see. Yeah, okay, I think that's all I have time for God Stranger. We'll have to be moving on to As Kingfishers Catch Fire. But we're gonna do the same thing. We're just gonna read it aloud. Feel free to close your eyes, whatever you want to do. And then I'll give you some time to think about it and find what you notice. So, this is As Kingfishers Catch Fire by Gerard and Hopkins. As kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. As tumbled over rim in roundy wells, stones ring. Like each tucked string tells, each hung bell's bow swung, finds tongue to fling out broad its name. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same. Deals out that being indoors or within, each one dwells. Selves, goes itself. Myself it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me, for that I came. I say more. The just man justices, keeps grace, that keeps all his goings graces. Acts in God's eye what in God's eye he is, Christ. For Christ plays in 10,000 places. Lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes not his, to the Father, through the features of men's faces. You guys have comments to consider that. All right, so as kingfishers catch fire, what did you notice? Similarities, differences, things that caught your eye, descriptions, maybe. And Zoom people also feel free to just speak up, whatever. This poem is a little harder. One? Yeah.
He seems to set up a lot of things next to each other, whether that's kind of saying something one way and saying it again another way, or I don't know, each line has kind of a theme to it. But especially in the first line where it says, as kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. And just setting up those two things kind of in comparison, he kind of talks about how they both have to do with some kind of fire imagery, and that just creates cool pictures in the mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, in the beginning you have this kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. It's kind of beautiful imagery. You could kind of perhaps the sun flaring off of these dragonflies, their wings. Kingfishers, which if you read your footnote, is essentially a very brightly colored bird, catching fire maybe in their beaks because they're going to eat, or maybe just off their feathers, brightly colored feathers. And what you'll notice is that he's describing things of doing what they do, right? These kingfishers are catching whatever they're meant to be catching. These dragonflies, they're basically just running around looking pretty, right? And then we have stones tumbling down wells. We have, I know it's kind of difficult language structure, but a bell, its tongue swinging, and the bell is proclaiming like a bell, right? This is what I do. Yeah, more. Anybody? Okay.
In line 4 with the bell, just the rhymes inside the line show like bow swung, like each bell's bow swung finds tongue to play it. Like just the rhyme so close to each other gives the image of like the bell hitting both sides of the, or like the tongue hitting both sides of the bell.
Exactly. Again, we have him using the exact form of the words you're saying to show you what he's saying. You get this kind of back and forth, just like a bell's tongue swinging. Yeah, perfect. Emphasizing that imagery. More? Anybody else? Zoom? Anyone?
What's the pivot all about? Tell me about the pivot.
Yeah, so what do we see from the first stanza to the second? Was that a maybe?
I don't know. Maybe like switching from like nature and what it's supposed to do to like what we were created for, and it like ends saying to the Father through the features of men's faces, like that we were created in the image of God, and it's, I don't know, more about us than not just like we have more of a purpose and more things to fulfill like inside of us than just a bell clanging or just, you know, a dragonfly like looking pretty. Like we have other things put inside us by God.
Yeah, I think, yeah, perfect. I mean, you basically hit the nail on the head there. We have this pivot between showing, okay, this is what things in nature do. They all do what they're meant to do. And then this is what we look like when we act in God's eye, what in God's eye we are, right? In Christ, we are brothers with Christ. We are Christ-like Christians, right? So when we do what in God's eye we're meant to do, we become more like Christ, and we actually become more like ourselves because our deepest selves are in Christ. And then, of course, as we do that, we see Christ playing in 10,000 places because if there's 10,000 of us doing that, it shines through, it reflects through, just like the dragonflies drawing flame. Yeah, perfect. Anything else?
Yeah, I have something.
Yeah.
So I think like, especially like the 8th line, like what I do for me, for what I came, I don't think that he's like dissing the fact that we can like, I know what Oscar Wilde goes back to, like that everything is beautiful in itself, but he's also like using that, and he's not contrasting it, but he's like aligning it with the fact that we can also be in God and with man, so like one and the same, which I thought was really interesting. Like, I know we talked about like romanticism, like always trying to separate that too, but that they can actually come together.
Yeah, totally. I mean, Hopkins would look at Oscar Wilde and he would be like, you got so close, right? You saw this beauty, you apprehended it, you saw it, you didn't get to the point, right? And that's God. And that's exactly what he's trying to do through his poetry. It's like, you see all this beauty that everybody's enamored by, the sunset, the animals, the bells, see all these things, and you're like, wow, that's really pretty. It's like, well, wait, take that a little step further, right? What else is there? And yeah, that's exactly what he's trying to communicate. I think Hopkins would be a bit disappointed in Oscar Wilde. Let's see. Yeah, so I tried to have a Bible verse for both of these poems, and for this one we have Matthew 25:40, when Christ says, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these, you did for me." And we do these things that God calls us to do. We do it for Him, but we also do it through Him. And because we do it through Him, His glory is reflected through us. He plays in 10,000 places, and He's seen through the features of men's faces. This is kind of what people talk about when they say, "Oh, you're a Christian, let the light shine," or whatever it is, we salt the salt of the earth. Yeah, perfect. Anything else to comment on, say, before we move on to essentially the last slide here? All right, perfect. So I'm probably going to be rehashing a little bit of what Hopkins, what we've already said. But Hopkins, I'm going to talk about his unique style because his poetry is very unique. As we've talked about a little bit already, he uses the characteristics of an object to describe it. And that is, it really puts that picture in our mind, but also enacts this whole selving thing. And this also allows him to pack a lot of meaning and imagery into just very few words, which is kind of the overall goal of poetry, is to say a lot by saying a little. He also uses alliteration, as we talked about, for emphasis. We had the dearest freshness, deep down things. And again, dearest freshness, deep down things. Sometimes he'll just eliminate syntax. He doesn't say the dearest freshness in deep down things. He just says the dearest freshness, deep down things. And this both emphasizes it because we're like, wait a minute. We kind of go back to perhaps reread that. And then also it makes the intensity of that image kind of hit us without interruption. He also writes in sprung rhythm. Even though I think I'm a fine poet, I'm not very good at understanding like the rhythm of lines and doing scansion and stuff like that. But basically, Hopkins' poetry has a specific amount of stressed syllables, but any amount of unstressed syllables. So he's not completely limited to a certain form, but he has enough of a form that it kind of keeps this similar tone throughout much of his poetry. And then finally, what I alluded to earlier, the density and difficulty in understanding Hopkins' poetry is kind of what makes it seem modern, combined with when it was actually published. But the content and what he's really trying to get at, combined with when he actually wrote it, is more in line with the Romantic tradition. But I have like a few minutes left, and I wanted to explain. So Hopkins influenced a lot of poets. Big names like T.S. Eliot, W.H. Auden, some amazing poets. And I don't count myself among one of those particularly, but he has very much influenced my own poetry. So I'm going to read my poem, Weeping Willow, that is actually being published in the Harvest Journal this year, our University Harvest Journal. And yeah, if you want to check out the Harvest Journal, you totally should. There's some really good stuff being published there. But I want you to look at it in a slightly similar way to poetry and see if you notice anything that seems equally worth talking about. Is that somewhat visible? Is that better? How's that? Good. All right. So, Weeping Willow by Rhoades. The weeping willow sighs, her hanging branches lightly shading the forest floor. Sun shines through her gaps, golden rifts in her emerald wall, pulsing, glowing, gleaming around ribbons of green. Her leaves and branches flow in the wind, moving to some invisible current, as if the earth were a riverbed, and she swaying seaweed. Her solemn, enchanting figure swirls about in eddies and storms, each leaf, choices once made, clothing her in a tumult of jade. But winter freezes her greenery, shattering her jade into razor shards. Regrets, that falling, tear at her roots, despair drowning her in drifts of snow. So she seeks the summertime, when leaves surround her, pressing in on all sides, hiding her face from the sun. Content to bloom alone behind her mournful veil, she entices her leaves to grow, keeping her from daylight's gale. Probing light aims to pierce her self-erected fortress, to reveal her barren bark, kept hidden for an age. And in such times of deadly solitude, when branches refuse the gentlest touch, then does the gardener enter in to caress the saddened, dying bush. With care and comfort, he reaches out and prunes back the impenetrable leaves. He opens up her emerald wall and breaks through her illusory sheen. For when the sun shines clear that morn, and Willow looks, expecting scorn, the pain and sorrow and hurt she'll see will be left fluttering harmlessly in the breeze. We don't have much time. I can sanitize everything if we want to take a couple more minutes, but you guys want to say anything you noticed, anything that was interesting, anything that stood out to you, connections to Hopkins, feel free.
It's so elegant, I love it.
Thank you. What makes it elegant to you?
The beauty of the words. I don't do that very well, and that's a skill.
Thank you.
Got a great Hopkins. Scroll down to where you start a stanza with "so." This is
Yes.
a good Hopkins moment where so Evan is at the end here of that previous stanza, regrets that falling tear at her roots, despair drowning her in drifts of snow. So, right? So he's kind of
So she seeks the summertime.
Yeah.
A lot of alliteration.
so the rhyme. It's a great moment. The rhyme bridges it. Yeah, pretty good.
Yeah, this is kind of where we see the pivot in this poem. There's always a pivot. Yeah.
I could definitely see a comparison in that, you were pointing out in Hopkins' work, the sun bouncing off the wings of the dragonfly, and then you were very much drawing attention to the leaves that were hanging and the colors and even the sun peeking through the leaves and I could definitely get a Hopkins vibe off of it, especially with the description of this.
I'll get it. Maybe I've done my job. Maybe I am a bit of a poet. One last comment. Anything else seem worthy of mention?
Yeah, I really like the last line because I think it's got like that, like the rhyme with like the harmlessly and sea, like has that certain rhyme to it, but then it continues with breeze. So I just like the emphasis that you're adding to that section that's kind of pop culture from the rest of it.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, guys, it has been an absolute pleasure to be here talking about this because Gerard and Hopkins is probably one of my favorite poets. You can see his influence in my own poetry. And I do hope you guys will check out the Artist Journal. I believe it'll be up in probably about a month. It'll be up once the semester ends. I'm in the professional end of class putting it together. So there's all kinds of things. There's poetry in there. There's fiction. There's research essays. There's all kinds of stuff. So there's something for everyone. And I think basically all you have to do is just Google Northwest University Artist Journal, and you should be able to find it eventually. So thanks for your attention. Thanks for your participation. Thank you, Zoom people. And yeah, I was gonna say I'll see you, but I guess I'll see you this way after Thanksgiving break. So yeah, that'll be great.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes. Oh, gosh, yeah, this is it.
Once again.
It's crazy, right?
Just like that spring.
Are you graduating?
No, I'm a junior, but
Okay.
I don't think I'll have any more classes.
Oh, Grace. Gosh, we're gonna have to stop by.
Don't be sad.
office hours.
Everyone shakes you together. I'm not.
Oh, man, yeah, so we'll get, it's funny, yeah, it's same thing with
A lot of my time I've been in class with kids.
It's crazy, yeah, you've got the, yeah, time works so differently right now. I have like this image of you like having been in my classes years ago, but it's really just been American Lit now.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh gosh. Well, give me one of those. We stop by sometime this morning.
I saw that I met you though.
We'll report it.
Have a restful break.
Exactly. I know it's not. So I know that I'll see you in the spring and
Yeah.
our class continues for the rest of the semester, but
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that this class has been really influential to me. I really appreciate you and
Means a
my
lot.
favorite professor.
Oh
was
shucks,
fine.
oh shucks, yeah, we can do a COVID hug.
Yeah,
There you
but
go.
yeah, thank you so much for everything.
Wow,
Yeah.
yeah, that's really meaningful. Thanks.
It is very meaningful to me as well, and that's why I want to just express that.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you for everything.
Yeah, you guys, this is why we do it. This is the fun. This is the good stuff. Yeah.
Okay, my turn.
You're forming a
No,
lot.
yeah, I just wanted to say thank you too. I know we're still gonna be online and we'll
Yeah.
have more classes and
Yeah.
stuff, but like I don't think, I mean, like I've known this is what I wanted to do, but like, you know, first few weeks and everyone's telling you what they're doing, I'm like, shoot, like maybe I like don't want to do this, you know?
Yeah.
But like seriously, like this class, this is how I know that like this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
So
Oh, cool.
thank you so much. Like I can't even explain to you how much I've learned from you, like as a person and like just the way that you view life. So thank you so much, and I'll see you.
COVID hug. COVID hug.
Thank you.
You guys.
Yeah, you helped redeem a lot of English in my perspective. I was one of the people who would read all the time, right?
Yeah.
Read all 3 Lord of the Rings books in 3 weeks,
Yeah.
that sort of thing, right?
Jeez.
I'm on
Great-
that
gracious.
right now.
Yeah,
Gracious.
you know, and
Yeah,
then going
of
through
course.
college, went through a few rough English classes I just did not have a passion for reading, but this class definitely encouraged me in that and made me want to start reading a lot more. So even my Bible I've been reading, partially
Oh,
influenced
man.
by that, but
Thanks for sharing that.
read a lot more of the Bible than I have in a long time. So yeah, you're probably my favorite teacher I've ever had.
Oh
So
gosh,
thank you
Daniel,
so much
that's
for that.
really
Yeah.
encouraging. Thanks for
Yeah, no, you redeemed a lot of English.
Give me a COVID hug.
And I'll see you online.
Yes, don't be a stranger.
Yeah, well,
Give me,
Thank you
give me.
for everything.
Thank you so much, Evan.
Like,
You
did great. It's amazing. Like, I want to find something that I love doing just as much as you find something that you love doing, and like,
Yeah.
I think this really speaks to me in like such an amazing way that I never thought was possible until I came here. I was like, wow, like Webster, freaking McQueen, all these great professors, and like, it's just been amazing being here. So
Thanks
thank
a
you.
lot. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Kimmy.
Yeah.
What you said today was so right on target about Oscar Wilde, and
Yeah,
it's not a contrast. It really is. They learn from. You're very insightful. That comment. Evan talked about Walter Pater was Hopkins' teacher, and Walter Pater was Oscar Wilde's teacher also. So they were all at Oxford at the same time, and they all kind of found their way to the Catholic Church in a way.
Yeah.
But you're very much kind of on point with that comment that Hopkins is relishing the beauty of the world just as much as Wilde, and he doesn't need to turn away from it. He can kind of hold that there with his devotion to Christ,
Yeah, he doesn't
Yeah.
just stop at the beauty.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
kind of
And
where
that's what's
Oscar
so
Wilde
sad.
stops.
yeah.
It's like, yeah, like we talked about like connecting both worlds together, and it's like.
Yes, the beauty is the divine name, and in that way he gets that. Yeah. Well, good. Can you give me
Thank
the
you
COVID
so
hug?
much.
Yeah, I'm glad that you
Yeah.
got something out of it, and
I did.
I will see you around. I
Sounds
will see you around.
Shakespeare, I will be there.
Oh, that's right. Great.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
So,
Yeah, that's great.
Yes.
I'm glad you're in there. That's great. Is it Carmen?
It is.
Carmen, I'm Joe. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Joe.
So what are you teaching next term?
Information visualization.
Oh,
It's
wow.
part of the UX.
What
UI.
is that? Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's really taking complex data and distilling it into some sort of visualization, either
That people
animation.
can readily kind of digest.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, cool. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, that's a new so you're working with Craig kind of
yes,
pretty closely.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, welcome. I don't know,
Thank you.
you know, you're a tech person then, I take it a little bit.
Yeah,
and
I
so,
am. It's not what I initially have done. I have worked in tech a lot, it's true, but
Yeah.
I'm not a highly technical person.
Yeah.
But just because I've gone more, everything's gotten so